Hello and welcome to Wait, It Gets Better, the improvisational storytelling podcast, where every week we bring you stories we'd be proud to submit to an editor or to a publisher anywhere. I am, of course, Levi.
I'm Reed.
And I'm Seth.
And we're here to tell you a story. It's time for episode 3 of Trouble in Party Town. How you guys feeling about this story so far?
Pretty good so far.
Yeah, I like it.
Yep, I'm feeling great about this. So, as a little bit of a recap, what we have here, ladies and gentlemen, esteemed members of the audience, is kind of a coming-of-age story. It's about a young king who is whisked away from the bureaucratic bloat of his town, of his capital city, and kind of strikes off into the wilderness surrounded by his sort of advisors, people whose job it is to make sure that he doesn't turn out an irresponsible mess, right? And through the relationship, the weirdly psychic relationship with his dragon, he is beginning to understand that the world isn't all that it used to be, that there's deception and deceiving happening everywhere, and that the dragons are coming back, and that could either spell sort of a unification of the world, or it could spell another sort of great and total terrible destruction of the entire known world. Does that kind of summarize it?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Great. And we are going to add in 3 more story elements to the whole thing, just to kind of top it off and really get to a place where we feel proud about where it is. Sound good to everybody?
Yep.
All right. So what story elements did you guys have?
I have wild card. Do you want me to say what I picked?
No,
Okay.
not yet.
I have unique weapon.
And I have goal. So I would love to hear your wild card, Reed, unless anyone has anything else that's not their story element that they want to add to it. Add to the story as it sits right now. So I believe we have it as it sits that the king has been gone for about a year or so, maybe 6 or 8 months at this point.
Yep.
He originally left because of quote unquote bandits in the northern reaches of the kingdom, or kind of making a nuisance of themselves in the towns and villages. And he sort of left kind of as a way to, in a stroke of trickery, to get out from underneath the kind of bloated bureaucracy that had risen up since the revolution about 100 years ago. And he escaped, at first unwilling to be the king and kind of be the leader, be the one who's going to take responsibility, be the one who's going to make those decisions. But through this kind of period, he has softened to it, and he has decided that someone needs to make decisions, right? And if it's been given to him, then he must have it. And my goal was that he kind of believed in a sort of divine right to rule, right? That's kind of what he was taught growing up, is that he was the king because his grandfather was one of the great rebellion leaders, and he became the king. And his father became the king because he was his grandfather's son. And now the king became the king because he was his grandfather's grandson, right? Kind of saying that he has the right to rule because of the lineage that he has.
Right.
But very quickly he gets out into the world and realizes that ruling isn't just deciding when the next feast day is going to be, and that I've been rereading The Wheel of Time, and the phrase death is as light as a feather and duty is as heavy as a mountain, right? And for a bit, he kind of veers off and doesn't want the responsibility. But the reason why he retains the responsibility and why he eventually gets his hands on the horns of the responsibility and starts to do it is the goal. So the goal is that the whole kingdom is really kind of held together through the very thin thread of the king.
Yeah.
Right? It's like their national pride. And he kind of realizes this, and it switches around to before him believing I want a country that's worthy of me to I want to be a king that's worthy of this country.
Amen.
Right? And people already rely on him, and they kind of, partially because of his psychic connection with the dragon, he has like a tempered mindset and a more he can think things through in a different and rational way, because everyone used to have a dragon, but some great tragedy happened, and that's since no one has a dragon except for him. And so he is sitting there like, now he has this ability to, people are looking up to him. And so now he's like, I have to do this. Instead of saying the world must sacrifice for me to have all this prestige, really it's the prestige is a small price to pay for the amount that is a small price for them to pay for the amount of sacrifice that I will have to do for them.
Absolutely.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So that's not his goal, but that is the goal. That's the goal, plot goal for his journey, right? To leave kind of haughty and feeling like things are owed to him because he's the king and he's got a dragon and he knows how to use a sword and he's all these things, and to come back as someone who views himself as a servant of the people, but also views himself as the only one who can be the servant of the people. You know, this isn't a democracy. No, not everyone can sit on the throne and be the king. He has just decided to walk that path.
Yeah.
So
that's like, reminds me of Marcus Aurelius, the emperor of Rome,
right,
who saw himself as a benevolent dictator. His duty was to use his power to the benefit of the empire and of his subjects.
Absolutely.
Yep.
Anyway, so that I had goal. So that's the goal for him. And that's I imagine this book as like a 3-book, like a trilogy. You know, you have your first bit, he gets out, he meets the he gets out, campaigns a little bit, meets the bandits and finds out that they are not, in fact, bandits from another country, but kind of a hodgepodge of people being drawn to this giant egg clutch that's going to hatch here in a couple, a couple of months or a year or so. And then the second book starts up with Keenan. Is that his name? Keenan? No, Yellen.
Yeah.
This
XYZ.
kind of bard, thief, kind of mob leader, just this quartet member, this din of this quartet who's just kind of watching the world fall apart, you know? And then his kind of interaction with the world as it falls apart, and then his eventual meeting of Xander, who's our hero. And then intersposed in that is the Xanath, the antagonist.
Yeah.
You know? And then the third book is the kind of ramping up as lines in the sand are drawn and, countries start to go to war as this clutch is sending out more and more powerful psychic waves, and countries come because they want the eggs. Countries come because they want to defeat the eggs. New knowledge surfaces about what happened to the eggs, and all of a sudden the whole world is kind of thrown into turmoil.
Yeah.
That's how I kind of see it. So this first bit of the book is just him kind of trying to get his hands around the horn of leadership and figure out, what it means to even like be responsible for himself. Oftentimes responsibility doesn't start with starting a company. It starts with, waking up on time to go to your job where you work for somebody else.
Yeah.
So anyways, I'm just going to say, I'm really loving this story. And I know I said it last week, but I have decided that I'm going to work on this story. I think I'm going to write a short story or try to write a novel out of this story idea. So
I love this story too. And I think that, the characters like Xanath, he's like, I think he would identify himself as lawful good. He sees what he's about is for the good of everyone.
Right.
Yeah, and he just, everybody needs to play by the rules, and he believes that this Xander maybe needs to be reined in a bit, but he is not seen as, although he is kind of a villain character, he would not see himself that way.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. He's not looking to do anything evil. He is just looking to do things according to what he views as right,
Yeah.
And that's really unfortunate thing, because oftentimes you get those people and then the system, this bloated bureaucratic system takes advantage of him because it has no qualms in lying.
Yeah.
And to Xanath, the bloated bureaucratic system is the church implacably right. And so it lies to him and he believes it. And therefore he steps into the villain role where he himself would not say that that's where he was.
Right.
So what are you guys' things? You guys got any good ideas?
Yeah. I want to introduce my wild card. And I don't know why I did this, but when I wrote it down last week, I wrote Wild Guard, spelled Guard, Wild Guard. And I don't know why, but it was wild card what I drew. And what I picked was villain sidekick.
Okay.
And since we've got XYZ, we've got Xanath, Yellen, and Xander, I'm going with W. This is Weston. And Weston is kind of got a slight build. He's not a very imposing creature. He's kind of endomorphic, so that he's not unfit, but he's not the kind of guy that, narrow, broad at the shoulder and narrow at the waist. Wouldn't he's just he's kind of, like I say, he's not unfit, but he's just not impressive. And he's a bureaucrat, and he has got some skills. He's definitely a flatterer. He is very smooth about how to recognize people's insecurities and how to butter their biscuits, so to speak, in such a way that builds kind of a loyal cadre of people that he can depend on to be persuaded to do what he wants.
Yeah.
And if he were going to be filling out his resume, he would call himself policy disciplined, which of course absolutely appeals to Xanath.
Yeah.
And this guy is like classic, one of I think of the most interesting character profiles. This guy is lawful evil. I mean, and he is a bad guy. And he has this instinct. There's a pettiness about him that he never lets anyone see, but he cannot stand anybody. If anybody is too big for his britches in his mind, in other words, somebody like his Xanath. Here he's this villain sidekick, but Xanath, he has nothing but contempt for him, because Xanath is this 6'5", commanding. He could. You walk into a room and he's going to command the room. Generally, he's ready for a fight if that's what's necessary, but only if someone is just, to restore order. I mean, But this is a guy. He's attached himself to Xanath, but he's secretly beneath. He has contempt for him, and he absolutely hates Yellen and Xander. These are two people that are too big. They think they're all that. They're too big for their britches. Who do they think they are? They need to be knocked down a peg or two. And his whole deal is to just spread his nasty. And he does it in a subtle way that he always manages to get. He never it's on the hook. He gets people to do his bidding. So when to undermine people, he's the whisperer behind the scenes. I think who I think of? I just thought of now. I didn't think of him when I was thinking of this character.
Okay.
But I thought of the worm that attached himself to the king of Rohan. Yeah. What was his name again?
Grima
Wormtongue.
Yeah.
Yes. I just now associated it, and I realized it probably subconscious. Sorry. I'm sorry, guys. I think I'm back. Okay, so did you cut off recording there?
No, but I'll cut it out. It's fine.
Oh, okay. But anyway, like I say, he has wormed his way into be kind of like a guy who gets things done for Xanath, makes Xanath's life a lot easier because this guy will handle his details, and he's no threat because he's such a wormly little guy. But Xanath doesn't think in the same diabolical, sinister, conspiratorial terms that Weston does. So he's not hip to it, so to speak.
Right.
Yeah.
you know,
He sees them as lawful, and so therefore he's lawful, and he's doing what's right.
Yeah. But this guy is like I say he's policy disciplined. I mean, he's really, really quick to use someone else's infraction of the rules or bending of the rules to as ammo. He has like a quiver that he stashes stuff that he can get on other people, and he can play those cards. You know, I see this as a kind of a guy who, you know, gets found out at his job, so he's not able to be very effective at undermining good people at his job, but gets himself elected as head of the homeowners association and spends his free time just harassing people who might, you know, have a work truck parked in their yard. You know, I mean, do you hear what I'm saying? This is he's the guy you love to hate, right? In the whole wolves and sheep thing, he's definitely a wolf.
But he's also a person who, because of the size of the bureaucratic system, finds comfort in that and finds safety and security in that. It's
That's
like, well,
right.
here in this place, we're all equal. It doesn't matter that you could, you know, beat me to Tuesday afternoon. It doesn't matter because in this place, I like it. I kind of have this idea that he's sort of like a handler.
Right.
You know, the conglomerate, the giant bloated mess that is the bureaucratic system has in it, you know, remnants of the old thieves guilds. It has in it the remnants of the old world, you know, the old alliances. Like all of that, all of those things have remnants inside of this giant bloated mess. And he operates as just kind of like the handler, right?
Yeah.
So he meets with Yellen, or maybe he's the one who kind of met with Xander, you know, to kind of tell him how things were, you know, and that's kind of that was his job, you know, in this place, to kind of be a handler, to be the one, because you don't ever talk to the people in power. You talk to the people in power's secretaries and the people in power's, you know, their
scheduler.
Right. Exactly. The person actually making the decision, isn't the person you think who's making the decision, but it's also never typically one person, because the orders have got to sit on 10 desks for 3 days before anything happens. You know, that whole, everyone who's listening has been to a DMV. They know how it is.
Yeah.
I like it, Reed. I like it. Does he go with, I have this idea that, does he go with Xanath when Xanath goes?
Yeah, I would expect he would. He may have to go back and like put out fires back in the home office sometimes, but he's a guy that's out there getting it done.
Right.
Yeah.
Or it could be even that he is the one who's going to go and try and find Xander, and Xanath just gets kind of recruited to follow along with him. You know, and that would I kind of like that better than Xanath going out to get him, because it's kind of like, well, he's the king. Like, you wouldn't send like armies to go out and get him, but you would send an army to like, or a, you know, enough of a protective force to like go.
Yeah, there are bandits out there after all.
Yeah. So I kind of like that maybe, what's his name again? I keep thinking Weston is the one who's going out to get the king, and Xanath goes out to kind of protect him, you know, just to lead the troops, basically. I like that. I like that a lot. I also kind of had this idea that, I don't know, maybe that Xanath and Xander are siblings or cousins, maybe, you know.
Ooh, that's
related in some way.
That's interesting.
Not in a way that would make it so that Xanath has a path to the throne, you know. So there's none of that. But
the second cousin on his mom's side.
Okay. Yeah, sure. Yeah. Second cousin on his mom's side. But still some kind of relation. So there's some pre-relationship there, you know, so that when Xander the relationship begins to break down, and he begins to change away from what is considered acceptable and righteous according to Xanath, it's not just my lord, it's we played together as children. You know, there's a bit more of that sort of relationship that goes into that whole thing. if you understand what I mean.
Yeah.
So, do we want to decide what the whole book? Because I feel like this whole thing could be one book, maybe just like in 3 parts. Like I was saying, there's going to be 3 books, but really it would be the whole book in 3 parts. Because I feel like we've got things pretty well written up. One of the things I was thinking about was that as it gets closer to the hatching point of the dragon clutch and people, begin to kind of feel this overwhelming urge, the country gets invaded from several sides, right? Some of it is like people doing mass immigration. Like they don't want to stay in this country. They're just moving through it, right? But when you have 200,000 or 1 million people just kind of walk through your country, you're going to like notice it, There's going to be thieves. There's going to be murders. There's going to be, horse people are going to steal things, so it's going to feel like an invasion, even though it's really just an invasion of people. You know what I mean?
Right.
And then on the other side, another country actually does invade, right? Because they have their own separate lists of, people who, magicians and prophecy and scribes, and they figure pretty much that like this dragon clutch or whatever this thing that's happening, either this country is causing it or this country is going to keep it all to themselves, right?
Yeah.
And so they have to start dealing with that. And then because of the whole dragon thing, lore or knowledge or understanding about what happened beforehand starts to make its way forward. Because before, we like the knowledge that mankind currently has is that the last dragons died out about 300 or 400 years ago, right?
Yeah.
They were terrible feral beasts and we hunted them to oblivion, right? But we don't have the information, or not everyone has the information. Some people have it, but it's a closely guarded secret that the humans and the dragons used to live in concert with each other, and that in fact it took a dragon's kind of slower development and more wisdom-based knowledge to sort of temper a human's kind of irrational need to just expand and so these feral dragons that we just killed a couple hundred years ago were the last couple of dragons that didn't have anyone to bond with and therefore went feral.
Yeah.
And what I'm saying is that as the book progresses, more and more of the information, and I think this information is probably found out by like Yellen, more and more of the information about like what it was before and why this breaking happened, 500 years ago or so,
I love the idea that you introduced last time is that you see Xander developing into a king and a ruler and a man of great character. And you introduced the idea that it was the tempering influence of his bond with the dragon.
Absolutely.
Yeah. They have a kind of a genetic memory of nobility of character that applies to the one who bonds them.
Right, exactly. But for some reason, in ages past, the humans decided not to. What was it? I think Seth came up with it. The humans either decided not to, or the dragons decided that they didn't. It was
like a mix of things. The more dragons there were, because it's like that, like generational memory.
Yeah.
So the fewer dragons, the more generational memory that an individual one carried. So some of them found that it was like, okay, we'll only have one offspring because then he'll be bigger, stronger, wiser because he'll carry all the memory, right? And so the dragons started, let's say, they could be your feral dragons that were killed off, not connecting with people, right? And then killing off their own kind so that kind of like in Jet Li, the one where he's killing off the other versions of himself. And as he does, he gets, that
right.
The ones that are left get, quicker, stronger, faster, and all this stuff. So same idea. And then the humans, right, instead of being tempered, they could, let's say, progress in their collected wisdom, right?
Okay. Yeah.
Without dragons in a quick and brash manner. And so that's where the breaking happened, is you started having well, the dragons are holding us back, right? And the dragons are like, oh, well, if there's less of us, then we can be powerful on our own account. So, I'm going to kill, right? And then you have, all the different, factions of, no, keep the unity. No, we can do without the dragons. No, we need to do with less dragons, all of that. And then it just kind of accumulated to the mass, destruction of the whole thing,
Right.
and the breaking of the world as it is, which brings to the unique weapon partly,
Okay.
that floats around. It's not one particular thing. And again, it's like a knowledge of this. A lot of people might have them, but they don't know what they are. Passed down from, father to son or mother to daughter, or, but dragon hearts, once they were removed, right? So I would think that like Yellen, this is where he has his power of fire, right?
Okay. Yeah.
They crystallize after a certain amount of time, and then you can break them off and they make like almost like a little jewel, right? Or you could keep it in its solid thing, and then you can focus through it to like bring back out an attribute that it contained, either
Okay.
fire, or I
Yeah.
think you brought up that there could be like fire or ice or wind or flight or something like that. So a lot of people have these little trinkets, especially if they've been broken down, which the smaller they are, let's say the smaller amount that they have. You might have
Right.
one that came
Right.
from like a
Right.
flying dragon and be able to like focus through and cast like wind, right? Like a gust of wind, right? But if you had the whole heart, you could focus through it and like fly, kind of idea,
Right. Yeah.
right? So you could like cast like a huge fireball if you had the whole fire heart, right? But if you had it on like a small ring, you could like it almost be like a lighter. You could focus through it and start a fire. You could have like make a small blast. You could basically that's like what these wizards or what they might have in their staff or on their rings or on their little trinkets,
Right.
right?
Yeah.
To pull off their um, conjuring of cheap tricks, and whether they know that that's what they are, but that's what it is. That's the unique weapon is. So again, to throw in that like, oh, we can use the power of the dragons ourselves if we kill them off, right? And then we have their
Right. Exactly.
thing, right? Like we can do without them. So like basically another side, not that the people who use them think that way, but that also being a one of the things that would have added to the breaking years ago, where everything was splitting into like 100 different ways to do it, and everybody started functioning inside of what they wanted.
Yeah. Absolutely.
But anyways, that's a unique weapon, is the different trinkets and rings and staves and amulets that are made of or inset with these pieces of dragon heart that can be utilized.
I like it. I also had this idea that the dragons brought a lot of things, like back in the age of dragons, right? There was a lot of wisdom because dragons were around for longer than humans. The world is the dragon's world. There's a lot of wisdom.
The dragon's world.
I was just trying to not say the age of legend, which is what Wheel of Time calls the time before the breaking. But there's a lot of things that with the emanations from the clutch and just from Xander's dragon being more active and around, like, because all that genetic memory is still in everyone. And it like begins to kind of awaken, it begins to sort of turn on. Things start to like old towers that before never did anything. People had stripped away all the stone that they could carry off and everything else seemed to be kind of glued together. But now that these emanations are getting more powerful, like lights have started to turn on and they've started to rotate silently. Old things that people mistook for being nothing at all, for being a pile of rocks, for being a mountain, for being whatever, have started to wake up because of the kind of emerging life of all these dragons that's about to hatch has like started to kind of all the dragons' old technology, all the dragons' old machines, all of their old things have started to come forward. And one of the things I was thinking of was that Xander's grandfather understood this, right? He knew that he knew about this, and his creation of the feast days for the fallen heroes that eventually turned into the bloat of the party planning commission was intentional, because he knew that with regular events of reminding about the past, that it would slow down the decay of human bloat.
Yeah.
Right. It would slow down humans like abandoning all tradition and abandoning all ties that bind. Right. Now, 120 years later, it definitely has gotten out of hand in the same way that you could say a country that was formed 250 years ago was formed on incredibly complex rules in order to keep human beings as free as possible. And now here 250 years later, that country still exists. Those rules still exist, but maybe there's a bunch of government spending and bloat that is just ridiculous and not good. You know what I mean?
Oh, I do know what you mean.
Yeah. Reed knows
We're
what
not
I
going
mean.
there.
Yeah.
I understand what you were saying.
In that same way, he created the reason why he created these, 17 feast days throughout the year was to kind of center people on this tradition. He didn't want it to become a religion. That wasn't his intention, but it was created in order to center people. And that's why this country is kind of the most prosperous and continues to be the most prosperous, even though it's bloated in other ways.
Yeah.
Right. And that's also one of the reasons why other countries, now that things are kind of all up in a turmoil, have decided to attack, because it's within his borders where this clutch of eggs are. And so everyone wants access to that. But then B, he's the biggest kid the biggest kid on the playground, and he's down. His king is missing. His king's been missing for a year and a half. Like, we're going to attack and find out if we can get some of this pie, you know? So many metaphors, too many metaphors. Anyways,
I do have something to add with, because I know before, like, these people, fire is at least in this age of things, something profoundly like different.
Yeah, absolutely.
All these rocks, I realized kind of, with the adding of the dragons, what these rocks are. They're the scales. So, they look like rocks. Because dragons, they're reptiles, so they're cold-blooded, are they not?
Yes.
So it's their kind of defense mechanism. If you put it out in the sun, it gets cool, right?
Right.
If you put it out in the rain or the snow, it gets warm, right? So the dragon then could go out in the heat and be cooled.
Right.
Go out in the rain or the snow, and then the contact with that water, that's why dumping water on it would then kind of warm it up.
Yeah.
Because otherwise, there's like the little addition of that.
Yeah, I like that.
But
I like that. One of the things I would think would be really cool to write would be as Xander, because this one dragon, right? It's the only one of its clutch. It's the only one alive currently that, unless there's more alive that we don't know about. That could always be added in later. But it is overflowing with knowledge. And I think that's one of the things, is that it has too much knowledge to be able to tell and communicate to Xander clearly. It's like if you had 100 servants all bringing food to you through one doorway, no one's getting through the doorway because it can't even, he can't organize his thoughts because he has all the knowledge of all the dragons. And so he's kind of in this place of almost being a little bit more of a feral pet, but slowly, as Xander, travels with him, begins to change as he's able to kind of sort through. And so eventually he begins to kind of drop these kind of nuggets of knowledge, like that's the scales, right? Or, whatever. So we can basically have time release lore dumps about the age before built in. And then once all the dragons hatch, that knowledge that the Xander's dragon has is disseminated, and all of a sudden his personality, which we've always felt because, he's written in a certain way and acts a certain way, comes forward much more because he no longer is the kind of sole burden. He's no longer bearing the entire burden of all the dragon knowledge in the world.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I was just thinking that the dragon scale theory, I was thinking when we were talking about the rocks, it's a kind of a commodity issue, like mining these rocks or however they're acquired. The ability to heat your home and cook your food is really a big deal. But the idea that these dragon scales, when they're like reach a like after they shed them, obviously they shed their skin or whatever, they're around,
Yeah.
but they are limited. It is I'm thinking like, when there's some medieval situations where they would have where there's shortage of fuel specifically, they would have big community ovens, and they would get the ovens heated up, and then the poor people would make their bread dough, and they would bring it and bake it in the communal ovens,
That's
because
cool.
not everybody had the means to have fuel stashed at home, to have their own oven to just use at their convenience.
Right. Right.
But I'm thinking like these scales are first of all, they don't wear out. They are really valuable because it's not like a battery that you put it in your flashlight and pretty soon it's not really working anymore. But it is a commodity issue. There is a scarcity side to this. You just don't have, I mean,
right. And there's ones that are incredibly rare.
Yeah.
Like I could see Xander having a suit of armor made from this that under certain conditions he's like half his normal weight.
Yeah.
Or
be incredibly agile.
Or twice his normal weight.
Yeah.
Like
when swinging a warhammer, it'd be nice to have that extra heft behind the blow.
Right, exactly. Or lots of different and interesting things. And at first they sort of believe that it's all the metal that's found in the earth, right? But then they kind of realize that, no, this is the dragon's world. Like this, so much so that this is them.
Yeah.
Right. And that would also kind of give people a sense of scale on the amount of slaughter that happened during the breaking.
Yeah.
If like you can just go to any random hillside and dig for like 2 days and find a deposit of this.
Yeah.
It means and that deposit's like the size of 10 football fields. And it's like, so that was a dragon or a bunch of dragons that died right there.
Yeah.
500, 600, 800 years ago. So how do we want this to end? This is a thing I've been thinking about, right? So my thought was that after that, either the last battle, right, as Xander has navigated all these things, the last battle happens either on the battlefield and he doesn't even get to see the dragons hatching. They're defending the dragons, right? They've they've fought them everywhere and they've continued to fight them, and they just fight them and they just keep retreating and fighting them. And soon they just got their backs to the dragons, to the entrance of the pass to the dragon's clutch. Right. Mm-hmm. But I was thinking like in Wheel of Time and in Lord of the Rings, both of them, they go to the bad guys' place to fight them.
Yeah.
It's like the fight in Wheel of Time takes place on the foothills of Thakandar, on the foothills of Sheol Ghul, like right there. That's where it happens. But I'm trying to figure out if the end of the fight or the end of the fight or the end of the books is with the hatching of the dragons, or if it's the hatching of the dragons and then there's a bit of time and then the fight happens, or the end result.
I mean, taking some inspiration from something, let's say like the Wheel of Time, and hopefully what I say about it won't ruin it for anybody, but like you could read the first book and that kind of be it, right? You could also then read the second book, and a few of them are like that, where it's like it almost kind of sort of wraps something up, but it also keeps going.
Right.
Does that make sense? I know the first couple were kind of like that.
Yeah.
Where then the next one kind of brings out where it's like, oh, like this was like the big fear in the first one. this is kind of then where we're still fighting with, this, kingdom or this group. And then, for 2 or 3 books, they're kind of fighting this kind of uprising here. And then they're, dealing with this. But then, like, the next book comes along, and then it's like, oh, then this changes. Like, who's allied to who changes. There's, let's say new bad guys. Not new bad guys as in they never were there, but like, does that make
Yeah.
sense?
Yeah, part of me is thinking that like with more dragons being released and more people being bonded to the dragons, it's not like the dragons are like, I will only bond to an honest person, or a dragon's like, I'm an honest. All dragons are honest. It's like, no, 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 no. Dragons, if we're just going to say they have if we're going to say they have sentience or consciousness, they can be influenced and be evil.
Mm-hmm.
Their job is to not their job, but like the bonding process only tempers the person's tempers the person and helps them grow in wisdom.
Mm-hmm.
That does not. What we could also do is say that the dragons experience a sort of reincarnation, right? Since they have genetic memories, they experience a sort of reincarnation. And then what happens is in this giant, people arrive and there's the clutch and they're hatching, and a couple of the dragons that hatch bond with people, but the dragons themselves are some of the ones from hundreds of years ago who helped to create the breaking.
Mm-hmm.
And they're kind of like, oh, I'm back. Great.
Here's the question that I have. We've got some great action points going on. So Xander has been out around his kingdom, and he's been learning and bonding with the people,
right,
and knowing more and more. And then, of course, you've got Yellen and his band of merry men, so to speak, and they've been he has been finding those who have been victimized, and they've been rallying to him, and there's a bunch of action going on. Now you have people kind of drawn to the place because of there are some that have a psychic predisposition to bond with a dragon, and they're being drawn to the clutch.
Right.
And then you have the invader. Okay, we've seen this prosperous, party town kingdom that has a lot going on, and people are in abundance, and there's celebrations, that people want to be a part of a happening thing, right? And so let's go and carve ourselves out, if not conquer it, at least carve ourselves out a slice of the pie, like you said.
Right.
So there's action points, and the question is whether we want to have another episode or two to kind of wrap up some of this action, or I think of the Russell Crowe telling of the Robin Hood story, where he's comes back from the Crusades, and it's this kind of standard Robin Hood thing. But then it's like, because of the way it ends, it's like, and the legend begins. Do you see what I mean?
Right.
So I see a question is, which would be the better way to go here? Go ahead.
Okay, I think that like one way to do it, if you're kind of expecting it to be kind of a lot of different things over a longer period of time, is where you'd have the first one kind of be where he's starting to step out, find his own. You start getting a few lower drops, but they're not really connecting all the dots yet, and maybe ends with like an accumulation of meeting certain characters, run-ins with the Xander and Weston, kind of bringing them in where, that is kind of an antagonistic thing. They're fighting the bandits. And it kind of ends with him kind of reaching his initial kind of goal, like, wow, I've kind of gotten to this point, right? But then they kind of take over these bandits who, like, they've just come back from the clutch, and right. So then now, like, you're somewhat unaware of the clutch, and it's like they're bandits. Well, then now they've just taken out a group of them, and it's another egg, and it hatches, and it's like, oh, well, and maybe there's someone else that's alive, one of the other people that they've, like, let's say, captured, that maybe has spun a story, joined their group. He was captured by these bandits. He's from this other country. Well, maybe later in the story, he's kind of their friend, helps them out with a bunch of stuff, maybe stabs them in the back because now he's actually a spy for that other country that's invading, right? To kind
Right,
of
right.
create kind of like you're bringing all these different characters, some are good and some are bad, or perceived good and bad, throughout this as the first kind of thing gets not Xander. Is it Xander? The
Xander's the
king.
king.
Xanath is the
Xanath is
Xanath,
the,
okay.
yeah.
Yeah, so then he's kind of like, he gets to meet the people, he kind of proves himself, kind of reaches that goal where he becomes that a little bit closer to that servant king, but then at the end of it kind of opens up that like there's something much bigger. That egg hatches, and then now all of a sudden his dragon might have a bit more clarity on certain topics,
Right,
explain
right.
something, and then it's like, oh yeah, then now there's two of them, and it's still maybe a bit garbled, but a bit more clear now coming from the two of them, right? And now you realize there's a whole clutch of these, and yeah, I don't know, like something like that. So then it
Yeah,
sets up for the next one where then it's like, oh, well, now this is a problem. Are these bandits? Are they kind of all coming here for this? And then it kind of reveals to our characters that next kind of subplot that then it's like, well, we could go back and like, this clutch is going to be the clutch, right? We could go back to the palace, you know, regroup, or we could keep going on this thing. And maybe some people go this way, some people go that way, and they cross paths later, but then kind of opens up to that next larger thing going on, kind of like the Wheel of Time, where, everything's so big in the first book, and it is, and there's a lot of stuff that sets up everything else. But then as it goes along, it's like, oh, it's bigger than you thought. It's actually involving these people you never heard of before, and like, does
yeah,
that make sense?
absolutely. I like that idea, Seth. And so I think to Reed's point, I think that what I think, Reed, we should do is we should call it good,
yeah.
because I want to write this story more than I want to do podcast episodes about it, because I feel like we could continue doing this for the next year.
Yeah,
For this.
absolutely. Absolutely.
Ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for finding me the first story I'm interested in writing a novel about. Thanks for listening. This is the end of the podcast. No, just kidding. No. We're gonna be back next week to talk about the story, our inspirations for it, and how awesome we thought it was. If you have any questions, feel free to send us a text message. Feel free to send us an email at waititgetsbettercast@gmail.com. Message us on Twitter at @getsbettercast. We'd be happy to answer any questions, happy to offer any suggestions, happy to just say hi. Until next week, don't forget to wait, because it gets better.